Good morning. Thank you for coming, and a warm welcome to MaRS and this Market Insight event, considering the market impacts from accessible energy data. I'm Joe Greenwood. I'm Program Director for MaRS Data Catalyst Program, and together with my colleague John Dogdrum, Practice Lead for the Clean Tech Practice and leading the development of the Clean Energy Institute, we'd like to still extend a very warm welcome to you all to MaRS today. I'll briefly introduce the background to the paper and the main areas for that paper. And then our moderator and the panel of experts here for what promises to be a very insightful and timely discussion. This will be a discussion around how we use the unique data assets available to Ontario from its investments to date towards a smart grid, most effectively and most appropriately. It's a discussion and a set of choices that will ultimately influence how we get the information into the right hands. How do we get appropriate information for consumers to conserve, businesses to manage buildings and processes efficiently? How do we get information so that partners can work together in planning energy schemes and energy management? How do we also start to enable a market for what is, in the industry term, behind-the-meter services? So ultimately, this is part of a bigger discussion and a bigger set of choices around how Ontario's place in a more global innovation race, about how technology and data is transforming the energy industry and the industries which sit around it. And that concept of a smart grid and a set of smart services and smart industries around it starts to take shape globally. So here at MaRS, we help to grow companies through access to advice, capital, talent, and markets. We also act as a convener and enabler for wider innovation. As a convener and enabler, firstly, we'll look out to the global trends and the local trends in innovation. And we try to understand, what does that mean for our markets? What does that mean for the Ontario society and for us as an economy? Then secondly, most importantly, we then bring together the parties involved to understand, how can we take action? What can we do to address those challenges or to seize those opportunities? And it's with the ultimate goal to use innovation to enhance our economic and our social prosperity. And it's with that kind of convening and enabling lens that we took to this Market Insights paper. So we talked to the industry stakeholders, global experts, technology companies, utility companies, regulators, amongst many others. Many are in the room today, and I'd like to thank you all again for your contribution and your insight into this paper. And for also undertaking and sharing so openly the thoughts and some really quite sensitive issues around this subject with the same interest and the same mindset. You helped us achieve our goal, really, of identifying and assessing the current state in Ontario of the innovations that can be enabled through appropriate energy data use, and how we can address the challenges and seize some of the opportunities. Again, bearing in mind this is a global context and a global set of markets. So the purpose of this paper really is to provide an innovation view to the industry, to consider collectively what steps can be taken. What are the pieces we can do to address some of these opportunities? And so with that, the paper forms part of a wider program here at MaRS and with industry partners. So through the Clean Energy Institute, to bring together different organizations to be able to translate the policy and the research ideas behind this into effective, innovative market solutions. And through the MaRS Data Catalyst program, to address some of the data-specific issues. And you're part of that. So through your participation in this very interactive discussion, we invite you to be part of the process. Help us explore what these opportunities are. Help us understand what these barriers and what the challenges are. Help us inform what the next steps should be in that process. And so just before I introduce the panel, I'd like to briefly also put this into the context of what's happening in Ontario. Because I said, this is a really very timely discussion, and a lot of other organizations and forums have given great thought to this same subject and the related issues. Again, all of those have provided great insight to this paper. So some current activity to bear in mind is the Ontario Energy Board's recent consideration in its regulatory review of what the market structure should be for behind-the-meter services. The Ontario Smart Grid Forum, particularly through the work of the Data Access Subcommittee and the Corporate Partners Committee, have considered what are the standards, where are they, what is the potential impact and the suitability of those for Ontario. And most recently, as announced, is an RFP from the Ontario Power Authority, which is looking at very specific consumer solutions based on the concept of social benchmarking. So this is a very timely topic, and with the MaRS eye to the innovation ecosystem, The role of this paper is to complement those activities and to look at the innovative solutions and the challenges in realizing their potential. And in doing that, we looked at 5 main areas of opportunity that are very relevant here in Ontario, and try to identify what specifically does that mean for us. Firstly, it was around consumer and small business applications, building management and the retrofit solutions and industry, district energy schemes, energy planning and energy storage, commercial software for the utility sector, and lastly, the role of data for the community and community projects. So there's a postcard on your tables, and there's a nifty piece of technology on the back called a QR code. So you can scan that, and that will take you directly to the same link on the screen to download that paper. So taste about that. And for those that are even more technology enabled, there is a Twitter wall, I think it's the hashtag energy data. So your comments and your thoughts will be pulled up in real time up onto the screen as part of this interactive discussion. So I'd now like to thank the moderator and the panel in advance who will examine the challenges involved in some of these quite complex markets and quite complex issues. To get that started, I'd like to introduce Ron Dizy as moderator for that discussion. Ron Dizy is CEO of Enbala Power Networks and chairman of the Corporate Partners Committee for the Ontario Smart Grid Forum. Ron has extensive experience in the energy industry, including participating in energy markets in different jurisdictions in North America and elsewhere, pioneering the opportunity really for loads to participate and the inherent flexibility of loads to participate on the grid, which in its own way involves a very unique exchange of information between different organizations and between different systems. So a real experience in some of the issues involved. So we're happy to have him here today, and I'll now pass the stage to him and to the panel to introduce that panel and the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to start with 3 questions. Green button. Who knows what this is? So everybody's kind of aware of it. Green button, do you think you really understand what this is all about? Wow. So significantly fewer. So the good news is this is what we're going to talk about in this panel. How about green button? Do you think we want some of that in Canada? All right, that's pretty good. All right, so there you go, Ron. We got an opening kind of thing for you. So this Thing US green button is about allowing data access, energy data access for consumers. And it's pretty amazing. It was launched less than a year ago, and we now have something like utilities representing 33 million people have said, we're going to sign up for Green Button and make this data available to our customers. In Ontario, we have a single MDMR, Meter Data Management Repository. So it would seem like we've got a great opportunity here. And managed by one person by the IESO, we still have to link it to the utilities themselves, but there would seem to be a pretty great opportunity for us to partner onto that. So the idea here with this panel is to kind of explore those ideas in a little bit more detail. Let's understand what the challenges will be and what the benefits will be. And we have a great panel to talk through that. So to my left, first we have Carol Stimmel. Carol's a research director for Smart Grid with Pike Research, a Navigant company. Apparently that's a 3-month-old kind of thing. So, and Carol's going to give us some background on what's actually going on in this in the United States and around the world. What's the market for this sort of data? What can you do with it? You know, kind of what's the upside to allowing all this? And the detailed bios you should have in a piece of paper. I'm not going to go through and read them in detail. I just want to kind of introduce people. Ron Dembo is CEO and founder of Zerofootprint, one of the leading, among other things, but one of the leading application providers for Green Button. In fact, entered US DOE competition, came second, but was the people's choice, right? Came first. And so our own Canadian company succeeding on the world stage and demonstrating the value of what if I had this data and what can consumers do with it. And finally, we've got Mike Winters. Mike is the Senior VP and CIO at Hydro One. So one of these utilities that would have to actually try to implement this. And I think we'll get some hear about some of the very real challenges about how do we actually do this. So we've got a fantastic panel. You're very fortunate. Thank you to everyone for coming. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Carol. Each of the panelists is going to speak for just 10 minutes to try to provide some background on it. We've got a counter here. We'll start. All of us will wave. When I stand up and wave, let's everybody wave so that Carol knows that Her timer's up. How's that?
Yeah. Keep me honest. That's always a good thing to say to an analyst, keep me honest. But so who's tweeting up here on this thing? So I'm going to keep an eye on this. So if you say something mean about me or my forecast, I'm going to see it. And I'm going to figure out who you are. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here. A lot of good stuff has been happening in Canada. Canada has been a global leader in smart grid deployments, and definitely something that I've looked at over the last 4 or 5 years as a model for how to view things proceeding in the world, which have various different models, as you might imagine. So, reading this white paper I thought it was excellent, and I encourage everybody to download that and read that. But the general concept is that smart grids are simply not smart without the intelligence to help correct deficiencies in the power delivery system. And that goes all the way from transmission now to the customer side of the meter, which is new, transgressing that meter point. But we're looking at, when we look at the smart grid data analytics market, it's pretty complex to segment, but we needed to look at transmission, substations, distribution automation, and the whole distribution system, including the smart meter, the customer side of the meter to leverage those analytics, and especially normative or behavioral analytics, which came up already, and also just generally balancing supply and demand. And we believe that smart grid data analytics are really the key to recognizing a return on the great investment that's been made in a lot of the hardware and communication systems that have been put out there. So a quick definition, there's always confusion about this, so we had to put a stake in the ground. So what is smart grid data analytics? So broadly, we're going to define that as the process of taking that raw grid data, which can be in a variety of forms. It may be structured or unstructured, coming off the grid very quickly, very frequently. It may be small, it may be large. It's very complex to deal with. It comes from the meters, smart grid sensors, intelligent electronic devices. Then we also have operational data that we want to bring into the mix, historical data and business data, as well as third-party data. The systems that are going to evolve nicely to serve the needs of the utility are going to be able to pull in that third-party data, things like weather, but also psychographic and demographic data about our energy customers. So we need to look at this data to be able to draw conclusions and make decisions. And some of the systems that are going to be very, very important going forward as we start to look at the technologies, I encourage you to look for systems that focus on predictive analytics, not just describing what's happened, but being able to tell where things might be going. So how do we look at this data? So this is kind of the cross-cutting segment. So we've got this meter data, we've got grid data, we've got data that tells us about our assets. We also have to have very good analytical systems for integrating renewables and microgrids as they come online. But we have business stakeholders, we've got the grid operators. Again, we want to look at the life of these assets, get out there, keep our quality of service high by replacing these assets before we have trouble with them, and not going out there and wasting the money to replace assets that still have life in them. And also, what we're talking about here today is the third point I have up here, which is customer management and participation. So this is kind of two sides of the same coin. On the utility side, we want to be able to identify non-technical losses, look at load patterns so that we can really offer more refined programs for our customers through demand response. And in addition, offer these customer-facing programs. We really don't know what's going to be successful. I think a lot about the evolution of the GPS, where in 1978, the government was putting out these satellites, and then all of a sudden there were these really geeky handsets that nobody knew what to do with. But if you were really into that stuff, you had a Garmin handset. Then came along Google Maps, which kind of masked the GPS data. But now on our smartphones, we have applications like Report a Pothole, Around Me, Friends Around Me, Foursquare, a whole bunch of applications where you don't even think about the fact that the GPS infrastructure is being used, but you're utilizing that data in the context you want to be using it. And that's where we really need to go. So along these complexities that I've sort of laid out, this general segmentation, we saw an evolution of how these these systems were going to be brought online. And again, it's a little fuzzy depending on the utility, which every utility really does have some uniquenesses to it. Geographies, jurisdictions. I think that's hard to grasp for a lot of vendors in this space. They want to offer just straight solutions. That's how they're going to make their money, but it's very difficult to get by without some customization. So we put together the meter data analytics solution, so an evolution of the meter data management system, then moving to real-time grid operations, asset utilization, and again, intermittency, the integration of intermittent renewables. And this is about a $32 billion market. And I'll tell you the truth, I did this market forecast, and I think it's really conservative. The reason I think it's conservative, even though we have a lot of economic uncertainty, especially in Europe right now, I think we're going to see, and despite what's kind of happening in China right now, we're going to see some breakout, I think, in our growth, especially in Japan. And in any place like Canada or the United States, where these meters have gone out in kind of a rush, especially because of the RF funding in the US, and now there's data coming in, and we need to do something with that data, whether we're going to provide portal information or through some modality to our consumer to allow them to have more information and control, or we're going to use it on our own network, or even for meter to cash operations. There are plenty of utilities that have this data flowing in and it's simply dropping on the floor. They're not looking at the intervals. They're still delivering monthly bills. They had to meet these obligations, get the infrastructure, this cross-cutting infrastructure out there, and now it's really a big question about what to do from a business perspective with all this data. So we've talked about this a little bit. The data is really not very useful unless you can transform it into something that's going to be useful for you. And I think we might see Ron might show us an interesting picture like this soon. I don't know. I put it in there for you. I wanted you to like me, so you tweet something nice about me. But okay, so there's lots and lots of ways we can look at this data. So consumers can use these glanceable dashboards, customer-facing web portals, in-home devices. In the utility, we still have, very important are the good visualization tools, which work better with the human brain. There's a lot less friction, a lot less fatigue, and better decisions get made. Also, just your traditional modeling software and spreadsheets are not going anywhere, especially on the financial side of the house. But from a business perspective, we want to look at this from a systems-wide level. We want to look at the business problems that the utility wants to solve. This is not a technology buying decision initially. I would say that if you go out and buy technology that you think is going to do great to solve your problem, but you don't look at where you want to go and how the business is going to evolve, you are likely to make a very costly mistake. You need to understand how you want to use the data today and where you want to be using it tomorrow. And some of those, some of that is just creativity and imagination. But once people get their hands on the data who have not had access to this form of data before, they will use it in new ways that are going to be surprising and very valuable. And so we need to keep our eye on that. I see I have 1 minute yet. I saw that look over there. I've given that look before. Okay, so everything about the grid is changing. And this is what we're talking about today. Innovation is playing a very, very large role in the smart grid data analytics market. Just over the last 2 years, I think I assessed and directly did primary research with over 40 vendors in the space. Some of them said, yeah, we do analytics. And I said, great, how do you do it? And they said, well, we produce this report out of our database. Well, that's not really what I had in mind. And then you have these pure play companies that are coming into the space, which is actually quite new. We expected all the IBMs and the traditional players to have solutions, and they have some pretty good solutions and frameworks. But there's also companies coming in, especially on the consumer side, who are really coming up with creative ways to deliver information and data with the goal of capacity and energy savings. So in every way, we need to start looking at the consumer as more than a captive ratepayer. That's just not the right mentality anymore. I mean, the utility, no matter where it is, runs the risk of being hollowed out and losing the relationship with the customer if they don't figure out how to engage them. And that's, some utilities are going to go that way. But we see the retailers coming into the market now, the security providers, cable companies, looking at ways to build a relationship with the customer. And right now the utility has the advantage there, but they could lose that very easily. So I'm excited about this, and this is going to be a very, very interesting market to watch, especially through 2020, and the drivers and the assumptions are kind of shifting sand, so keep track of it, and we'll keep you updated.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So now we're going to have Ron Dembo. 10 minutes is going to help us imagine what your world can be like if only you had access to real-time energy data. Right?
Thank you, Ron. And thank you, MaRS, for putting this on. I think it's very timely. This is really, what we're talking about today is really part of something much, much bigger. And that is that data is really becoming the oil of this century. And this is not I wish it was my comment, but I heard this somewhere, I can't even remember where. And I really believe it. Actually, what oil was to us last century, data is going to be to us this century. I absolutely believe it. And the infrastructure around data is going to change the way we live and is going to be the industry of this century. So for example, when you have data and lots of data, it's not very useful unless you have ways of accessing it easily. If you have electricity, it's not very useful unless you have standardized wall outlets so that I can plug my hairdryer in anywhere. And those APIs are, in some sense, new to us. We don't necessarily have enough of them. We'll talk a bit about that. So what we do as a company is really build those APIs and build those apps that make the data that's available there useful. So just to give you one example of that, this is Green Button. We've talked a bit about Green Button. Simple idea, create one API or programming interface that an applications developer like us can write to or read from, and then make every utility offer that. And then in that way, every single homeowner now has the same way of talking to my app. So I write one app, and now we can talk to 30 million homes. So I'll show you an example of that. That was, this is a concept that was developed by the White House, originally for health data. And so as we stand today, we have roughly about 35 million homes in the US that could be accessed through one API. So in addition to that, the White House has actually gotten into the business of competitions. And they launched a competition which was fantastically successful. In a matter of 6 weeks, people like ourselves built applications that would use this data in some interesting way. And then they had these data paloozas, in which I attended 2 of them, in which you'd brainstorm about what more could you do. So in this case, our application was trying to conceptualize what a utility bill would look like in this century, rather than the utility bills that we look at today, which are built last century, for the most part. And we came up with a simple idea that, we want to hit one button and in 15 seconds see everything we need to see about how much money we spent on electricity, gas, and water, whether it was up or down from last period, how did we compare to our peer group, and what could we save if we really got religious. So what happens when you really open data? An enormous amount happens, things that you don't expect. So for example, at one of these data paloozas at the White House, we were trying to brainstorm about what innovation could happen when you open electricity data. And well, the first thing that's obvious is once you have data, you can actually measure things. And that changes a world into one that's evidence-based rather than model-based. So you can actually know whether someone has conserved energy and then reward them for actually conserving, rather than kind of guess that they might have conserved energy when you gave them a new fridge and reward them. So one of the products that came out of this was what they call the negawatt product. I mean, negawatts actually was invented out in Colorado. The word came from Colorado. But it's basically, the idea is simply this. What if you could allow consumers to participate in an electricity market? You pay me for the watts I don't use, and I pay you for the watts I do use. And if that market were an open market, we might see a very different kind of behavior than we see today. Today, I can do any kind of silly thing I like by plugging something into a wall, and you can't stop me. You have to give me electricity. So we built a negawatt app, and I'll show it to you in a second. Then the New York State Governor's Office approached us in that same meeting and said, you know, we have tons of data, but it's all in silos. What if we were to open this up? So let me give you an example of some of that data. So there's NSTAR data, which tells you what appliances are out there and what an efficient appliance consumes relative to a non-efficient appliance. And, you know, where you can buy them and so on. Then there's Unwaste New York, which is a big, really lovely website, which not only shows you how to finance retrofits and where you can buy stuff, but it has a lot of educational material. And then there's NYSERDA, which is all about energy efficiency. It's based in New York City. And, you know, what are the renewable programs out there, you know, what innovation's happening, and where can you find out about it. So imagine if all of this data was now taken into a user-centric view, which is what APIs can allow you to do. So we built 3 little, you know, prototype APIs to these databases, and then assembled that data into one view and combined it with the available product that we did for data, the competition. So now not only do we have a place where you can see your bills and see how you consume and how you compare, but we can link you to all the information that's relevant to do something about it, and all in a seamless way. So here's what this little toy app did. And these are things that are built very, very quickly and clearly are built on a database and an environment infrastructure that takes years to build. But once you have that infrastructure, building this is quick. So this is the Negawatts project where we linked to the New York governor's databases and built it on top of the app that told you what your utilities would do. So this is a consumer, Nicholas, and he's actually produced, you know, 1,000 megawatts. And you, the utility, I'm going to pay him for this. This is, in effect, demand response taken to the ultimate level. So there's Nicholas compared to all of his peers. He's really doing well. And, you know, on a map, he looks pretty good. And now Nicholas himself has his own goals to, you know, I want to increase those megawatts. I'm getting paid for these things. You know, this is a fun market. And says, I'm going to shoot for that. What should I do to get there? And so now we go to the NYSERDA database and the Unwaste New York database and says, you know, you should be insulating your attic. And if you did more of that, it would shift you along. You know, you could also switch to tankless water heaters and so on. And so then Nicholas, you know, says, okay, I'm going to do these things. That'll get me into that megawatt range that I want to get into. Where can I find someone who will actually implement it for me? And then, you know, he says, I live in this zip code, which is in this section of New York State. Where do I get the suppliers? And there are the suppliers, another set of suppliers. And, you know, he gets his negawatt report from the utility that month. So that's the sort of visioning that can happen very, very quickly. Now, to take this to market, this is a prototype today, but to take this to market is really only a few more months if a utility were to buy in. So at this moment, we're actually working with the White House to locate a utility in the US that will want to do this. And that's how they are enabling innovation. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron. All that in only 8.5 minutes. So Mike, you're going to tell us from the utility perspective why this is so easy or so hard or somewhere in between.
I'm now wishing that I didn't go after Ron. I'm going to seem really boring. And folks, I am from Hydro One, and to Carol's point, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and and how we're not the same as maybe others, not just within Ontario, but across Canada and across North America. Hopefully I don't come across as Doug, that dumb old utility guy, but I will try to ground us in today's reality. Now, I'm not saying that today's reality has to be tomorrow's reality, but I want to, again, just give the context and put things into perspective, what we do and what we can do today, and then what maybe hopefully generate some ideas as to what we can do tomorrow. So who are we? Hydro One is the primary transmitter of electricity in the province of Ontario. We transmit 97% of the province's power. So the other local distribution companies are actually our customers as well: Toronto Hydro, Ottawa Hydro, EnerSource, PowerStream, and so on. We also distribute electricity to 1.3 million end customers. Interesting stat there is we actually have more wood poles than we do have customers. So that gives you an idea of to the geography we serve. We're primarily rural. A very different demographic than, say, a Toronto Hydro would have with their 800,000 customers. They definitely have more customers than they do have poles. When I'm talking in the States, I do make a point of saying that our service territory is twice the size of Texas. And if you actually took the map of Ontario and overlaid it on the States, our service territory would stretch from New York to Miami. So just to give you an idea as to the service territory and the vastness of it. I'm going to give you some insight into what we do today from provision of time of use or usage data to our customers. So this is actually, I logged in. I'm a Hydro One customer myself. I'm also a PowerStream customer, but I logged into the Hydro One site for the purposes of this. And you can see right there, and I think Ron made this point, is we already have a centralized way of provisioning data. We have the ISO's Meter Data Management Repository. So when I logged in, you can see there that it says, wait a minute, we are actually getting data from the Meter Data Management Repository. This will take just a minute, and then we'll show you what we have. This is, you can see that the names have been blocked to protect the innocent. It is my account, and I have opted in to provide you with this information from a privacy standpoint. I did block out the account number and the meter number just for kicks. You can see what my usage has been across the on-peak, off-peak, and mid-peak times over September 22nd, October 21st. I can go into my hourly data, and I can see this is for a particular day. This was the Sunday of Labor Day long weekend. I was up at the cottage with the family, and so we were using electricity. And so this was my hourly consumption. It's all green because it's off-peak because it was a Sunday. If I also show if I get the daily, this spans the same period. You can actually see, and I can see that, yes, I did leave the cottage on September 2nd. And oops, I left the water heater on. Of course, I left the fridge on, but I also left the water heater on. And so, you know what? This is valuable to me because I shouldn't be doing that. Why heat water when I'm not there? And obviously, I was paying for some of that in on-peak rates. You see on the upper right-hand side, I can also download my data today. So that capability is there for the 4.5 million customers across Ontario. This is a particular website. It's hosted by a third party, but it does represent Hydro One. And I can't say with definitively that every utility allows this, but I believe it is within the requirements. So if I click on the little spreadsheet icon, the Excel icon, I can download my hourly consumption data. Now, I can also tell you that to date, about 1% to 2% of my total customers have accessed that website, period. I can't tell you how many have actually downloaded the spreadsheet. Probably 0.001% of my customers are actually spreadsheet jockeys that actually want to download this and slice and dice it and do things their own way. Now, Green Button has two interesting aspects to it. It's download my data and connect my data. So download my data, is there something there? Do I as a customer want to look at a spreadsheet and see what I can do? Personally, I don't. Connect my data? Now we're talking. Now are you going to surface my information in a way, not data, and to Carol's point about smart grid and smart data analytics, smarts is really taking data, turning it into information, turning it into insight, which then leads to intelligence. So do that transformation for me, and I would maybe looking at my utility or a third party that's working with my utility to provide me that information, surface it to me on my smartphone because I'm actually a smartphone user. Now, going back to my customers. So we are primarily rural. And I don't know if anyone has heard the stat that there are actually worldwide, globally, there are more cell phones in circulation than there are toothbrushes. That's kind of gross, isn't it? I can tell you with reasonable confidence that there are more toothbrushes in circulation within my customer base than there are cell phones. So you also have to consider who the utilities customers are, and are they smartphone savvy, are they web savvy, are they internet savvy? Not all of them are going to be. So we need to communicate with our customers, and we're always looking for innovative ways to communicate with our customers, but we also want to do it in the form that they are used to. Some may still like to read things in the newspaper, a bill insert, and so on. Others are thinking more from an app standpoint. I also want to show you one other thing, and I'm going to take a bit of a risk here, and I'm going to connect my iPhone. I'm going to put the password in first so that everyone doesn't see my keys. So this is an app that we went live with, and it's available at the App Store, at the BlackBerry Store, and the Android Store. Wait a minute for it to come up here. And it's Hydro One's mobile app. It's for outage notification or outage information. So I will tell you that Hydro One did not develop this application. We partnered with a third party to actually provide this application. And so what I can do is, as a company, I can actually send news and updates on various things to my customers. And I can also show where the outages are throughout the province. I can toggle over here, and actually I can see as a management tool that I have 8 active outages, planned and unplanned, in the province right now, and it's affecting 133 of my customers. 133 customers of 1.3 million without a power isn't good, but we've definitely seen worse. 2006, 200,000 customers out with the twisters that went through, and of course in the States with hurricanes, you definitely see more of that. As a customer, and again, I am a customer, and I use this application throughout the summer. We're in cottage country, and so the power does go out. I didn't call the call center. I didn't call our grid control center. I do have a bit of an inside edge there, but I didn't call them either. I went to the app. And I'm going to wait a little bit because I still have to count on one of my neighbors to call into the call center and actually notify us that there's an outage. That seems very archaic. But with the advent of smart meters and with AMI, I can connect that to my outage management system to actually help me triangulate where those outages are much more quickly, dispatch crews more quickly, and get the lights back on more quickly. As a customer, I have this information in front of me. I can see that this particular outage is impacting, if I can get that back up. This particular one is affecting less than 20 customers, and it looks like the estimated time of restoration, the ETR, is 9 a.m. So again, this is an app, and this is our customers, if you think about it, going down to first principles. Our customers care about their lights staying on, and they care about their bill. They care about their bill. They want to see it lower, lower, lower. Of course, we all do. But they want their lights on. And the expectation to Hydro One, and that we take very, very seriously, is the expectation from our customers isn't just keep the lights on. It's more cost effectively keep the lights on longer. These things, this is notifying the customers, giving them the peace of mind that we're on the case and that we can actually estimate when their power is going to come back on. This is important. Do I need to, as a customer, actually empty my freezer and send it over to my neighbors or to a relative's house? Or is there reasonable confidence that the lights are going to come on soon? So this is something that our customers have wanted. We have 23,000 downloads to date. It's not gone viral. But know what? Maybe that's 23,000 people that aren't going to call into our call center and ask for that same information. So again, we're surfacing information to our customers in a form that they want when they want it. My total cost to serve may go down because I'm not handling those calls. So what motivates us from a customer application standpoint is a few things. We want to enable energy savings for our customers. We definitely want to improve customer satisfaction. We do want to lower our total cost to serve, and that also drives customer satisfaction. When our costs are lower, our customers are happier. We also want to improve, like many corporations, we want to improve corporate reputation and build that rapport with our customers, be that trusted energy advisor. And of course, and this is last but absolutely not least, we need to maintain privacy of our customers' data every step of the way. So hopefully that gave a little bit of insight.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to start by asking some questions of our panel and try to stir things up just a little bit. We do have 2 mics out here, one here. So we're quite keen to have questions from the audience. So if you have one, please make your way up to the mic so that I can see you and know that you're there. We've also got, I believe this is in a webinar right now, and so we may get some questions from the web as well. We'll watch for those. So my first question. It sounds like if you are in, especially if you're in one of the bigger LDCs in Ontario, Toronto Hydro, Hydro One, PowerStream, Viridian, EnerSource, I think all those guys have some version of the app that you showed, Mike, meaning that as a customer, I'm in the Toronto Hydro service area, I have the ability to, as you point out, see my data and download it. So my question is, and I'll start with you, Ron, so what's the big deal? We're kind of already doing this, aren't we? So help us understand what are the salient, really important differences between what Green Button provides and what we kind of have already done in Ontario. So we're not totally in the backwoods here, right? We actually have an MDMR. We've invested in smart meters. We've spent a couple of $2 billion doing that. So talk to us a little bit about why this is so different and in your view, why it's so important. Then Mike, maybe I'll get you to comment on the differences between what we have and where we'd like to get to.
So in some sense, we are blessed here. In other words, we have something that everybody down south would like to have. 100% coverage, smart meters, small businesses, homes. We've had that for 2 years. The data's been sitting in a database called MDMR, and it's hard to get to. Let me give you an example of why there's a big difference between what you showed and Green Button. I can go to my Hydro One, I'm a Hydro One customer, I can go to a Hydro One site, and I can click on something and I can pull down. I mean, there's a lot of steps I have to do to go there. And I'll show you, I didn't bring it up this time, but in a talk about a week ago in this room, I showed a calendar, which is just part of my normal daily life, where that information just comes to me. I have to do a lot of work to get my Hydro One data, and I can put it in a spreadsheet. Then, if an application provider wants it, I have to give it to them. And think of all the, privacy is a big deal, but think of what risks I'm actually exposing myself to then, because I'm going to send an Excel spreadsheet over the wire. So the difference is that's pull. I've got to go and pull this information, and I can't do much with it. Green Button says any application provider can write to one API, and then any user can just say, get my data, and nothing else happens. I don't do anything, except when I'm on the Zerofootprint app and I say, I agree, automatically that data is fetched for me, it's put into this application, it's chewed up and shown to me in something I like to see. Let's take the outage app as well. That's also a case of pull. I can go to the outage app and I can see stuff. But I'm a Hydro One customer and I have outages out at the farm. What I'd really like is not a pull app. I'd like someone to say, you know what, there's an outage at your farm now. It's on my BlackBerry and an alert. Mm-hmm. So that's push.
That's phase 2.
Okay. Great. I'll buy it then. But the basic story is this: it's quite hard to do things today. So, for example, we've written apps that can go to Hydro One's site and can go to Toronto Hydro site and scrape the data off a PDF with someone's permission. But that's also not a very safe process and not a very, interesting way to get data. So that's the problem. Where we can completely overtake what Green Button's doing is because there's just one database there. The API would be much simpler than what's happening down south. Every utility has to write an API in down south or write to the Green Button API. Here, one company writes one API to MDMR, and then every utility just has to send us a token, and that allows us to do the transfer.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what's the difference?
I agree with Ron. So let me elaborate. We already have APIs. I need the APIs to communicate with the MDMR. I need the APIs or the XML for the MDMR to communicate back with me so I can actually put the information on our website and on the customer's bill. So we may be we're not at step 0, we're maybe at step 9 of creating that de facto standard. Now, because I happen today, which seems a little archaic to produce an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, the data and the API is already behind it. Yeah. So can we, with the customer's permission, and maybe it's clicking on the green button is that permission, and I can record that permission granted, that then allows others to use that same API versus surfacing it on a spreadsheet, but doing it a different way for third-party apps to use.
Can I just interject for a second? That really does say an enormous amount. We are so close, we don't even know it. It is a trivial step. The major plumbing has been done on your part and on MaRS' part. It's so close to achieve a green button here that it's not even funny.
It's hard to take next step.
Can I make a comment on that?
Absolutely.
So this is pretty interesting. I love to listen to these kind of like technology decisions, and it's very exciting to me because we're so early in the evolution of engaging the customer and figuring out what works for the customer, and providing them this kind of data to try to drive energy savings or capacity savings. But sometimes I get a little worried when I hear the haggling over, we do have to have open systems, we need privacy standards, it's definitely going the right way, but let's not lose track of the fact that we have to be able to tell the right story for the consumer to get the engagement we need to drive the savings that we're ultimately looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a great point, and that drives sort of a follow-up to the same question. It seems to me that one of the really salient differences is what we have right now is the utilities have decided what the interface is going to be. So we saw the picture of what it is, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, it just is, but there's only one. And it seems to me that the benefit of green button is now, you're not a spreadsheet jockey, although you seem like you might be just a little bit, Mike. And some people are going to want to have huge access and actually be interrupted by their data, and others are going to go, just tell me what to do at the end of the month, and others are going to want it in very different ways. And maybe you guys could just touch a little on this idea that people aren't all the same. And the whole point here is, with green button, we can interact with our energy data in the ways that each of us want to, not in a one-size-fits-all, which necessarily has been the approach that utilities have had to take so far.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that, Carol?
I think you said a word that I'm not quite sure we're there yet. You said that users can interact with their data, right? And so I think actually we're more, except for a couple of products, and we're quickly moving towards that interaction, but mostly it's just information, and then kind of the human interface looks at that information and tries to figure out what's wrong with their water heater or that type of thing. But when we bring analytics to the customer and allow them to explore different scenarios, try on different things, have building envelope information, really customize and make meaningful the data for them, then I think that's where we're really going to start to see some uptake in this kind of stuff.
Ron?
Yeah, I agree. What happens is, but it's a Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
You're talking about that peak of the pyramid, and
No,
we're talking
in
about
the middle
fact.
somewhere.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
talking about the
Right.
fact that there's no plumbing. We are working with, for example, one instance where, it's a lighting manufacturer that has lights that talk to the internet that can tell you exactly what's happening in that square foot. Mm-hmm. And you can now start to do attribution. In other words, I used a lot of electricity, why? We're working with another group which actually allows you to see which big appliances are on very simply. And so if I spent a lot of money at my cottage, why did I spend a lot of money? So that's where you get to that next step. Mm-hmm. But we're still not at that first step, which is, the data's kind of locked up from the consumer. What Ron's talking about, I think, is really important. If you open up the data, 50 companies are going to be building applications like ours and things that we've never even dreamt of. And all of a sudden, the consumer has a lot of choice and can interact with their utility in a different way. And I think that's what's missing. So green button will enable that. And today, we whatever you decide we have to consume, and maybe it's a good decision, maybe it's not such a good decision. But it's still, as you say, one decision.
It's one decision.
Right.
Mike, any comments on that?
A couple comments. One is open it up. Makes me a little nervous. I will confess.
Okay.
Open up seems like the Wild West, and it can't be. So yes, can we open it up and provide access, better access to customers and to third parties who are serving our customers on our behalf? Yes. Are we going to do it in a secure and a privacy-sensitive way? Absolutely. So open it up. As long as you've got security and privacy in there, let's open it up. And to Carol's point, we absolutely have to make this customer relevant. 1% of my customers are going to the data today. You know what?
Yeah.
It's probably part of the format and part of the way I'm surfacing it to them. Maybe they can't.
What percentage of those are actually employees of Hydro One?
Yeah, true. True. But know what? Surface it to me in the form I want, as I mentioned before, or maybe surface it to my 12-year-old who would actually think it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And are you now going to compare my usage to my postal code or something else? That is something my 12-year-old would get all over.
Yeah.
I agree 100% with the fact that you don't just open up data. It's not like, there it is. You need those kind of regulations but those are things that make markets work. The right kind of regulations. The apps have to have a certain level of privacy. The apps have to have a certain level of data integrity and so on. A certain level of safety. But that's what governments are for.
Great.
Well, and I think you're really right, and I think we should stress that the kind of the behavioral model of how am I doing compared to people that are like me, whatever that dimension is, has proven to be very, very successful, and it can be used in an ethical way. So I think that's
so that brings me
exploring.
to a follow-on question, which is we hear these numbers, 22 utilities, 35 million people. It grows by a couple million every time I see the number. It's obviously going really fast. So what's the evidence that this works? What's the evidence? We take the effort, we do the work to make Green Button work. How much risk is there that it's who cares? How much risk is there that it's for the 1% of bit flippers? So what's the evidence that this actually causes changes in behavior, that people download the apps, that they use them, et cetera? Let's start with you,
Yeah,
Carol.
the evidence is not good, but it's not because it doesn't work. It's because the studies have not been very, they're not easy to compare. They haven't had a lot of structure to them. They have not been, a lot of, they're more like science experiments. So it's been going on for a while. And where we have seen some of these information-based pilots, sometimes we see these massive savings, like 20 or 30%. Usually that's associated with automation. But then we find out things that, there was a guy who worked for the utility that was hitting his main breaker every day before he went to work because he wanted to win the prize. So, that's...
And he had spoiled food in his fridge.
Right. So, there's that kind of Hawthorne effect where people engage in a study and they know they're being watched, so they behave in a certain way. But I think the real question is are these savings going to be sustained? So, not only do we have to get the attention of the energy consumer, we have to teach them new behaviors and then have those behaviors be transformed into habits. And then we'll be well on the road. But I think we're pretty early in that learning cycle.
We're early over here, but you go to Germany and you'll see that people are not early there. Every apartment block for years now has had, information on as you walk in the door that tells you how that apartment block behaves relative to other apartment blocks.
Yeah.
And when you walk into in the Champs-Élysées, if you walk into a building, the lights aren't on; they come on when you walk in, and so on. So, without changing behavior, we're not going to get there either. So. It's a case of we have to do it. There was a question out there.
Hi, I'm Jen Hiscock with NRCan. Last week we just got some results from a customer research survey that said that one of the concepts that resonated with customers about smart grid the most was the smart home. And then I see on your example Velo bill you've got electricity, natural gas, and water, and I'm wondering if you can give me a sense of the appetite or the momentum, maybe Carol or Ron, with your experience from those utilities, from the water and the natural gas utilities, to be able to have their data opened up, and the idea of the smart home that might resonate with the customer more. Maybe the ability for those to migrate.
It's a great question. So the question is, your app showed an integrated energy view showing not just electricity, which is the subject of the MDMR, but also gas and water. And
so utilities aren't all equal, but there's certain utilities that are very into this. I'm talking about gas and water. I know my home now has smart water. We have real-time water information coming from my home over Wi-Fi. I still don't have access to it, but so in the case of we found one city, London, Ontario, that's going to roll this out: gas, Union Gas, London Hydro, and the city for water. And we've also found a bank that's been willing to come into this whole fray and say, you know what, we'll reward consumers in that city who are green. And green means you're either in the top third of all of your consumer people that you're being compared to, or that you've moved the needle towards green. So this should roll out as soon as we finished our privacy, God willing, with our privacy assessment. It should roll out before the end of this year. And so that's kind of so to answer where I think it's too early. We haven't really done this yet. Even Green Button hasn't really rolled out yet.
So we have 33 million people in the utilities who've signed up. That doesn't mean that Green Button's available to those guys yet. That just means the utilities
it does mean any one of those customers. It's actually 11 million that have really linked now.
Okay.
Any one of those customers who says yes on our application can get their data in that application.
So how many of those 11 million are today? We don't know. I think it's too early.
Mm-hmm. It's too early because we still have to talk to the utilities to get access. Mm-hmm. So it's still not, the whole system hasn't yet come together. This is very early days. It's
directionally right. So too early is the answer.
But I cannot believe that if you had 33 million people really with a lot of different apps that could help them, it wouldn't change behavior. I've got to believe it'll help.
I mean, when Al Gore invented the internet, he couldn't have imagined how far it would go.
Well, it's the modality, right? So I think we're still trying to figure out the right way to deliver this information. When I was developing in-home displays, that we had the phrase MTKD, mean time to kitchen drawer. How soon till that IHD ended up in the kitchen drawer? Well, when the battery died or it was taking up too much space in the kitchen. So we have to figure out how to fit this information into the lifestyle. So if I have 100 apps to choose from, am I likely to choose Angry Birds, or am I going to choose my home energy consumption app? So we just haven't seen it in the field yet. And these are all things we need to understand. And to your point, there are a variety of users and a wide variety of the way people want to use information, but crossing that chasm and really getting the kind of market penetration we need to see the savings we want, there's a lot to explore.
But there are real examples that are tangential but really show what this can do. So New York City, they've mandated buildings to declare their energy usage. Today it's still in a closed drawer. They don't have to show it on the net, but by the end of this year, every one of those buildings is going to have to post that on the net. And now there are applications, and now you understand where the 10,000 buildings in New York City are that are the 80% of the problem, and people have actually started retrofitting programs for those.
So public shaming is a strategy.
Yeah.
That's
we
good.
call that
We have a
normative.
question from the floor.
Faisal Karmali from Quincy. We're socializing energy use as well, along the lines of what Zerofootprint's doing. My question's for Mike. It sounds a lot like these apps and different platforms are being looked at in the utility world a lot as another broadcast channel, as a one-way, here's something else you should know about something you already don't care about, energy use, other than when there's an outage. Are the utilities starting to think about this? We got a sense of it last week at Smart Grid, about these applications being of value in terms of two-way communication and what you can actually get back from the customer besides consumption data by the hour?
Mm-hmm. So when I commented to Ron that really the push of the information to the customer or getting feedback from them is phase 2, and it truly is. So we're actually working on something called iNotify as part of that same outage app, where the customer can actually tell us when they see a tree on the line, or when they see, or when they're out of power. So it's yet another avenue for them to communicate with us, and they can sign up for us to provide them their ETR, their estimated time of restoration, every time it updates. So it's that two-way, we are interested in that two-way. Yes, as of right now, it has been very much broadcast, given the information that they want when they want it. But we got to get that dialogue going. So it is on our radar. Of course, we need to make sure that we've got the business case for doing it. We can justify the expenditure.
Thanks. So one of the things I think, well, I've heard it more than once, right? One of the things with the power system is everything seems to have a lot of zeros attached to it, i.e. it's expensive, right? Moving a power plant, you know. How much is this going to cost? So, and I know that's a hard question, but is it going to be $1 million? Is it going to be $10 million? Is it going to be $100 million? To enable green button in the province, given the investment we've already made in MDMR, common architecture, your best guess, I'll start with you, Mike.
So when Ron develops these really great apps and just needs to connect with me, it's going to cost me very little, honestly. And the return can be great. Now, when I say it will cost me very little or cost Hydro One very little, we have made the investment since 2005 in smart meters, and you mentioned billions of dollars. And even if you look at the outage app, we had to get that information from our outage management system, so we made considerable investment over the last number of years in that infrastructure, in those applications. It's now a matter of capitalizing on that and then taking it to the next level. It's not millions. The outage app itself, getting it on smartphones, was a nominal additional cost. But you can't do it unless you have that underlying infrastructure and you're actually processing the hordes of data underneath within your back office systems. If you don't have the back office systems, if you haven't made those investments, you're looking at multiples of millions of dollars to actually get there.
But still less than 10. So we're not, in the scheme of a power system, it's billions of dollars.
Less than 10 for me, less than 1 for me to do some of these things.
Okay. Ron, what do you think?
I would say it'd be less than 1 million to get Ontario onto green button.
Great. Carol?
Sure, I'm an analyst, so I don't know.
Give us a prediction that it will certainly be.
I'm not even going to give you a prediction, but I do want to make one comment that the kind of the collaboration we're talking about up here is crucial to driving these kinds of programs to the consumer, because utility, doesn't necessarily have that kind of consumer engagement experience. There's lots of people that can come in with innovative ideas, and this is how new things are going to happen. So it drives down the cost for utilities, provides opportunity for entrepreneurial and innovative players. So it's really win-win, and this is a great example of that.
Okay, we got a couple questions. I'm just going to have one more of Ron. Ron, are you, this is unfair because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but who will pay you? Are you expecting the power system to pay for the apps, or do you think there's going to be enough value in the apps that we actually think consumers will buy them, that we can, if we enable the infrastructure, that everything else will just sort of take care of itself in a natural market?
I think if I would think forward rather than like tomorrow is
Okay.
compares. We need an energy market that's efficient, right? Let's start there. We're not going to get an efficient market if it's just a one-way street. I just grab whatever I get from Hydro One, and the hell with them. They got to provide it to me. If Hydro One incents me appropriately to use electricity appropriately, for example, pays me not to use electricity at peak hours, which actually makes sense for them, and there's a Negawatt app that can help me do that, then I'd say that's how I get paid.
Okay, so you.
But today it would probably be consumer gets our app free, and the people who need to save energy and want to pay for it, the government, OPA, would pay us.
Some sort of a program.
Some way.
Hi, so Zeb Tate from University of Toronto. I had a question about the data that comes from the Ontario smart meters. You said people would be envious of what we have, but there's like a, hours, day-long delay on the data, and it has very bad granularity. I was wondering, sort of, if we already have the communications in place, what's sort of the technical hurdles to actually get real-time data or data with a higher granularity than we currently do? Because a lot of the benefits you get from like social interaction happen when you see real-time. Like you're using more than someone else right now, versus when you go the next day and you find out that you used more than the other person yesterday, which is all we can do right now.
Yep. I guess that question's for me.
Well, there's actually
No,
it's worth pointing out here.
take
We do
away.
have this single MDMR, and that's fantastic. It has yesterday's data in it, right? So let's be clear that it's not clearing in real time. And so Green Button would provide access to that, day-old data. Fair enough. It's another step and another investment, I think, to get real-time access to the data. Is that fair, Ron?
Yeah, no, I think we're working with a utility, for example, in Holland, and we get 10-second data today, 10-second delay data, and it's directly talking to the smart meters. So there's no MDMR there.
Right.
The API is to the smart meter.
Right.
But the way we deal with this today is actually, I absolutely agree with the person from the University of Toronto. The best kind of engagement with the consumer comes when it's really real time. So we actually outsource a box that's built here in Ontario, plugs into a board, and gives you the real-time data. The smart meters that we have set up here were not really set up to do real-time data. They were really for billing purposes mainly. So we're in a bit of a bind. We've got smart meters, but they actually won't satisfy what you want, which is the consumer behavior change.
Right. It's a good point because we are collecting the data, and when I say we, it's LDCs across Ontario. We are collecting the data we're doing it over cellular backhaul, and we are collecting it through regional collectors wirelessly, and then we have to upload it into our head-end system and then send it over to the MDMR for them to do validate, edit, estimate, and then give us the data back. That takes a day. I am collecting it on a more frequent basis, 15-minute, in my head-end system. But because I have an MDMR, I'm not going to store it. That would be sort of double storage. And storage, even though it's a commodity, it gets pretty expensive, and CIOs everywhere really care about that. So it is a limitation in Ontario's market today. I think if we put a few smart folks in a room, we can probably figure out how to crack that nut.
And at least get to 15 minutes. So you're sort of saying the data is stored at some level, maybe not all the way to the MDMR.
Well, mainly the 24-hour lag. What can we do about that?
Right.
In the London pilot, it'll be 15-minute data from London Hydro.
Good. Carol, anything to add to that?
No, it's true. Like, how do we get to this behavior change? So do we need that real-time data? Will that make the crucial difference? And I think it does make a difference, but I actually think that getting to automation is the key. But before we can do that, there's going to have to be that trust built. Trust from the utility that the data is correct, and trust from the customer that the data is something useful to them that will augment their life.
Yeah.
Great. Another question from the floor?
Hi, Bob Logan, University of Toronto in OCAD. I applaud smart metering, but I want to pick up on a remark of Carolyn about habits, inculcating habits. I believe motion detection light switches would save a lot of energy. I'm appalled by the condo I live in that the lights are burning all the time in hallways that are very rarely used. So what plans are there to get a massive adoption of these kind of simple technologies that are prevalent in Europe and Brazil, where I just was? That might be a smart move.
Well, there are different tactics. Like in the UK, there's mandates to put in-home displays in every home, and just as an example. But I really think we're pretty early. I'm not sure we know the answer to that. I think we're still struggling with the engagement piece, and if we can build a compelling reason for a consumer to be engaged in their energy. I mean, right now they look at their bill and they pay it, and that's pretty much it. That's a pretty small percentage of your educational opportunity throughout the year. So we hear a lot about let's educate, and then this will automatically happen, but I don't think that's true. I think that's part of the puzzle, but I think there's a step before where we really figure out how to give some useful context to a consumer the average consumer, not the people that think about, like in this room, who think about electrons all the time.
Well, there's a great statistic that it's very easy to compute, which is the average Canadian, the average person in this room, if you were average that is, would be spending less on electricity a day than the latte that you just bought. So $3 a day per person. So it's not a hugely compelling reason to save 25 cents on $3 for the average Canadian.
Yeah, I think that's good. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kevin Gilchrist. I'm an advisor with the Clean Tech practice here at MaRS. We've talked a lot about the consumer, and there's really two types of, and I like this negawatts concept, but there's two kinds. One is energy shifting, and moving it off the peak times when we stretch our resources. The other is actual reduction, which will make a difference in emissions ultimately and infrastructure. But what are the utilities doing to become that two-way? Because not every megawatt or negawatt is created the same. I mean, you've got areas where there's congestion. We've got problems with technical and non-technical loss in the province. How do we direct into areas where infrastructure is, and that return on investment can come from infrastructure reduction and the strain on the system, rather than building, distributed generation and managing that?
Mm-hmm. So now we're getting into a whole new conference topic, which is really the operational use of this data. And again, turning that data into information and insight. Asset analytics is actually a system or a product that we just developed and are now using in the early stages, but we have the algorithms and we're surfacing it geospatially so that we understand where our highest risk assets are. So is there a pad mount transformer out there that's being loaded beyond its capacity, how many times a day, or how often is it above its over temperature state, that type of thing. That gives us insight into, wow, we're overloading that transformer, we better go upgrade that before the lights actually go out. Other things like our wood poles, we have age and we have condition information. And I also can overlay that with where are my major customers? So do I have a critical mass of upstream or downstream customers? Or is that wood pole actually, if I can zoom in a Google Earth type or streetscape wise, actually see that that's a wood pole that's really old and about to fall down and it's across an intersection. I now have a public safety concern. That helps me understand where I got to focus my investments. Vegetation management's another one. Rather than saying vegetation management, I'm going to clear this broad swath across an area, can I actually use some of my data, some of my analytics to figure out where can I be a little bit more surgical there? So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity from an asset management and a investment management to focus our investments and make better, frankly, asset decisions and increase reliability at the same time.
So maybe a comment, Carol, you talked a lot in your initial 10-minute presentation on the value of smart grid analytics. The topic here today is kind of engaging the consumer through access to data. If I bridge those two things, I mean, it's true. I think you just said, every negawatt is not the same. Mm-hmm. In Ontario, we have surplus baseload generation in a decent number of hours of the year. We actually have more energy than we need, and we sell it for a loss or at least at very low value. What about the idea of using access to the customer access to the data, and real-time access to the customer, a bit of a riff on the outage system, to actually direct behaviors in ways that are actually very useful to the power system? This idea that, the 10 top hours of the year, my friend Paul is here, he'll talk, I'm sure we'll ask a related question. It costs a lot to supply energy in those top 10 hours. If we could eliminate that or shift that, you make a big impact in the power system. And it's not just that every kilowatt hour is worth the same. We make it smarter than that.
What's the difference between this and the 407 where every kilometer is not the same? Certain congestion hours, I'll pay more for that kilometer than I pay in others. If you go to Singapore or in Songdo, Korea, you will see a billboard, and as you drive it, I'll tell you how many cents a kilometer you're paying, and sometimes it's $3, and you will stop the car and walk or something. So that's the kind of behavior. We've actually seen this in terms of behavior change in a school that we've worked with here in Toronto, where that kind of instantaneous feedback can lead to 20% changes. So the bottom line is that every kilowatt hour isn't the same, and that's why you need negawatt apps. Because if I had a little iPhone app that said, I'm going to pay you 23 cents now for that kilowatt hour. Why? Because I'm buying it from a hire for 50 cents. I still make out.
Right.
In fact, it's largely profitable in some
Yeah.
of the experiments.
It would be a great, there's an arbitrage that hasn't been exploited.
I'd never seen the negawatt concept before this morning, and it seems really, really intriguing. I will offer a little bit of a hurdle or an obstacle is we now need to work with our regulator to get the proper rate structure and tariff structure in place, because now it's a whole different way of doing things. Now we are transforming as an industry, and we are doing things differently today than we were doing even a year ago. But when we start talking about the back and forth of dollars and payments to customers for energy they don't use, we got to make sure that we have the right structure in place to be able to do so.
Yeah, and that extends to distributed generation too, and not making the same mistakes that were made in California around paying people to put energy back on the grid.
So let's come back to that. There's a big, I think, elephant in the room still, which is, okay, so why aren't we doing this? It's not very expensive. And so what are the remaining challenges? But before we come to that, so everybody gets to think about it, let's have one more question from the floor here.
Paul Accioni from the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I'd just like to get the panel's comments on the dilemma that we're facing as we roll out Smart Grid. We have two major goals for Smart Grid. One is reduce our energy intensity. We're currently using, I guess in Ontario, about 10,000 kilowatt hours per person in electricity consumption, and I think most people argue that 6,000 or 7,000 kilowatts a year is plenty. So there's an efficiency problem. The other problem we have is our grid operates at 63% capacity factor, so 37% of our capacity is wasted. Though the things we do often are in conflict with each other. For example, right now as we've been rolling out smart meters and smart grid, our nighttime load is dropping, our peak load is rising. It's making the grid less efficient. So we're gaining on energy, but we're losing on utilization factor. And it's making electricity rates rise much faster than expected. So can you just offer some comments on how we reconcile this dilemma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can offer some comments, and that's what the Negawatt app is really trying to do. 40% of our costs, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is in the last 10% of delivery, that peak. And I'll guarantee you that if I paid you 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and by the way, in Chicago, in Illinois today, at 3 in the morning, if you use electricity, you can get paid 10 cents an hour for using it. You get paid to use it at 3 in the morning. You might start doing your washing at 3 in the morning if I pay you 10 cents a kilowatt hour. You definitely would see a shift. But it has to be easy. It has to be something I don't have to log on to a site, then sort of put in my password, which I forgot, then put in my account number, then go to the spreadsheet, then download it, then, you know what I mean? It's got to be a lot easier than that. And if it is, and my little cash register in my BlackBerry is going, or my iPhone's going and saying, wow, you've got 400 megawatts today, I might behave differently.
Yeah, I'll go back to my initial comment I made. It's about, getting smart from those assets. So really gaining the situational intelligence that can be gained by the two-way communicating grid. So even without the customer, I think there are so many opportunities for operational efficiencies, which you can speak to extensively. But that's why it's possible just to even build a business case without customer savings, the customer end-use savings, for the smart grid to pay for itself. But it's all about getting the intelligence out of it and making the right actions.
So it sounds, we've had a few questions in here that are driving to additional benefits, right? Beyond the relatively simple homeowners reducing electricity use through awareness. We've got, examples of not every negawatt's created equal, the notion of capacity utilization, the notion of avoiding investment or at least deferring investment in distribution system upgrades and maybe even generation. So let's come back to it. It seems we've touched on it. There seems to be two major barriers besides the money, which we've decided that, Ron will just do for free because, it's not there very much.
You got that message.
Yeah, that's right. We got that message. So it seems to me there's two major questions that we're left with. One is the business question, just how do you pay for this, right? We've got a regulated system here. So how do we get this paid for? And it seems like the second one is privacy. So Mike, let's start with you, and maybe you could give some color on the two things, those two, tell me if there's a third or a fourth, but that's what I've heard so far. The relative importance of those two things and what you think the best approach, and I think this is our last question, right, Joe? What's the best approach to break through those barriers? We'll kind of go through each of you.
So I'll be brief. We are a regulated entity. We work very closely with our regulator, the Ontario Energy Board. We are not unique that Ontario is the only regulated environment in North America, around the world. So it's just a matter of working with your regulator to make things happen. It's not. In that environment, though, it is a brutal reality that you can't be as nimble as you otherwise would like. So I mentioned justifying the expenditure, and it's not whether we're regulated or not. Any corporation needs to have a business case for proceeding with a certain investment. What do you think the ROI is going to be in the form of customer sat or productivity and cost effectiveness, so on and so forth, increased reliability. On the privacy front, and I will take a page out of Dr. Kavukian's, our Information Privacy Commissioner's book around her privacy by design principles. This can be win-win. Privacy is a concern. It has to be top of mind, but it doesn't mean that you can't do this because of privacy. You can do it and maintain privacy concepts along the way.
Great. Ron?
So I actually think there's a tremendous amount of money in our system to pay for all of this. Tremendous. I mean, and in many areas. Let me give you two. One is the tremendous difference between the cost of supplying peak and off-peak. And if that arbitrage can be exploited, you could pay for as many apps as you want and as many green buttons as you want. That is a government kind of thing. We need to change our electricity markets so that they treat it like financial markets. If I put in a bid for, I'll sell you electricity from my car at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, at 10 cents whenever you want it, but I'll buy it back from you at 2. That might sound stupid, but at 2 in the morning you might actually give me that at 2, and at 12 noon I'll give it you at 10, and everybody would be better off. So we need to move to markets that are more efficient for electricity. They're completely crazy, our markets for electricity today. As regards privacy, I think it's essentially stuff we deal with every day when you get onto Facebook or whatever. It's an opt-in, something we've become so used to. I mean, there's a lot of detail under the hood, but essentially if you opt in and you give me permission to look at your stuff in a limited way, that's essentially privacy. And there's obviously a lot of security. I don't think it's a big issue. I think it's one of it's a regulation. You need to have privacy to do this, and otherwise you can't, and then people will just do it. So I do think there's tremendous amounts of money in the system that we're not exploiting. And we need our government to start thinking of electricity in a completely different way.
Canada has been on the lead of the privacy issue for a long time with Dr. Kavukian. I mean, really a world leader. And the point there is build it in from the beginning. Do not attempt to layer it on afterwards. It won't work. And I actually do think trust is a big deal right now because, or data privacy is a big deal because of the trust issue. So there is not a lot of trust at this level from a consumer-customer perspective with the utility. So that's just not how the utility and customer relationship has been. So there does have to be a trust-building exercise in the beginning before people are willing to deal with sort of the things they'll expose through Facebook or social media. I think that's evolved at a different pace, but it is setting the trend. And in terms of getting this done, I totally agree with you. It has to do with the relationship between the utility and the regulator and building that big business, the right business case. And I think the business cases are getting better and better and better. There have been some early disappointments in terms of recognizing some return on investment, but there's a lot more rationality in the market now, and we're going to have to grow at a more measured pace. So it's all about that relationship on both sides.
Thank you. Joe, are you going to take us home?
So very briefly, just to say a very big thank you to our panel, to Ron, to Carol, to Ron again, and to Mike. We kind of set them quite a difficult challenge, a very nuanced discussion with a lot of really quite important implications in terms of how a new market emerges. How's this going to behave? How do we address issues of privacy, of trust? How do we work out who can do what? How do we build value on top of what utilities have already done and already achieved? So thank you again for, Ron in particular, for helping us thread our way through that delicate conversation. And thanks again to all the stakeholders who've actually given us a lot of feedback to try and layer those and understand those issues and put that into the market and the opportunity context, which is what the paper does. And again, you can download it by looking at the QR code. At MaRS, we were very cognizant as we went through this exercise of exactly the issues that the panel have raised. We're continuing to work with most of the regulators, utilities, and stakeholders and bring those together to proactively move those and address those forward. This discussion was very informative about how we do that, about what are the issues we need to surface and how do we appropriately move them through. You will be hearing more as that program starts to come together with those regulators and others to try and address that issue. That's our intent, to meaningfully take action on the issues that have been addressed and to take a very open approach to how we collectively do that. So thank you for your discussion and thank our panel.
Thank you.